Hello, creators. Thank you for joining me, and welcome to the art part with Miss Colleen. Today we're going to be beginning our exploration into the art element known as form. Form is what we use to talk about three-dimensional shapes in an artwork. So you know that with 2 dimensions we have shapes like squares, circles, and triangles, whereas in 3 dimensions we use form to talk about shapes like cubes, spheres, pyramids, and other more complex 3-dimensional shapes. The materials you will be needing for these exercises today are a piece of paper and some kind of drawing utensil. I'm probably going to be using a pencil for mine, but if you'd like to use some crayons, you can do that as well. A lot of times when we talk about form, we use form to discuss 3-dimensional artworks themselves, like sculptures that exist in 3 dimensions. But we can also use form to talk about the illusion of 3 dimensions in 2-dimensional art. So we're going to be using a couple of different art elements to practice creating 3-dimensional shapes on our 2-dimensional paper. It's very simple and it's going to be pretty fun, I think. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create some simple shapes and make them appear 3-dimensional using the art element of line. And the first way that we can do this is we're going to be starting out, let's just start out with a simple square. So anywhere on your paper, you can do any of these exercises we're going to do anywhere on your paper. Very free-flowing today. Pick a spot and create a square. Or it could be a rectangle, any size, but you want those straight sides and right angles. I think that's my square for today. The next thing we're going to do, we can create a cube using a couple of different methods for this square. We'll just do these pretty quick. You might already know some of these, but it's good to practice. We take our square, and if we draw another square slightly to the side and either up or down from our first square, we can start to create our 3-dimensional cube. So I'm going to draw another square exactly the same size and shape. Well, almost exactly. I am a human, so it may not be exactly perfect, but that's why art is art. Draw another square just like that first one. A little bit up and to the right is what mine is going to be. Now I have my 2 squares. I have the front and the back of my cube, or the front and the back, depending on how you look at it. And I take those corners, every corner of my squares, and I'm going to connect them to the corners of the other square. So the bottom right corner of my back square, I'll call it, connects to the bottom right corner of my front square, and you continue that with each of those corners until you have the illusion of a cube. This is still a 2-dimensional piece of paper, but since I have created the illusion of 3 dimensions, I can begin to look at the form that is present in my artwork. The next way you can draw a cube, very simple, very similar also, is you get your square or your rectangle. And you're going to do almost the same thing, but you're going to skip that first step. I'm going to go straight to drawing those connecting diagonal lines from each of my corners. And I'm going to stop there and then connect the ends of these to each other to create the illusion of that back square. So I want each of these lines to be about the same angle and the same length, so that then when I connect them, we've got another cube. It's the first way we can start to create a 3-dimensional object on our 2-dimensional paper. Next, I'm going to use these cubes. If you'd like, you can erase the inside lines on your cubes, or you can leave them there. It's up to you. Next, I'm going to pick a point where light is going to be coming from and shining on my cube. So I think I'm going to create my light source right here in this corner. And I'm going to draw my little light source onto my paper so I remember where it is. And That's something I suggest for you as well. For these form exercises, it's going to be very helpful to know where our light is coming from. So I'm just going to say that's my light source. Now I can use value, the lightness or darkness of a shade, to create an even greater illusion of form on my three-dimensional cube here. If I have my light source here, that means that whatever is the closest to my light source is going to be the lightest, and whatever is farthest away is going to be the darkest. So I'm going to start with my lightest side of my cube, which is going to be this side, and I'm just going to shade it in very, very lightly. Get a very light value on that side of my cube. Next, I'm going to go to my second lightest side of my cube, which is going to be this side here. And I see that the light is shining more on this side and less on this side, so I make it just a little bit darker. Not all the way dark, because I know that there is one side of my cube that's going to be darker. And that's this side here. Now, I have this light source on a little bit the back side of my cube. So this front side of my cube is going to be the darkest side of my cube. So take a second, decide where your light source is on your cube or your rectangular prism, if you made a rectangle 3D shape. And shade in the sides of your cube according to where your light source is. And this is my side that's nice and dark. So we're really beginning to incorporate different elements of art in order to study these the different elements of art. We can use shape, line, and value in these exercises to explore the element of form. So there's a cube, and we can begin to see how this is starting to take shape as a three-dimensional object, or what appears to be a three-dimensional object. Next, I think I'm going to create a three-dimensional cone. So this is a triangle shape with a round base. So the way that I'm going to start out is by drawing the top part of a triangle. And then I'm going to imagine that it has a round circular base. So I will draw that at the bottom of my triangle, a nice round base. And then I think I'm going to do the same thing I did here with my cube, where you can see the lines on the other side. So I'll just complete that oval at the bottom of my cone. So there, it already sort of starts to look like a cone. I can add some more lines to make it look a little bit more like a cone, so it looks like I'm seeing the front and the back if I do that very light. Oops, don't want to go all the way through. I think I'll use my eraser on that. Then it looks like there's a line on the front of my cone and a line on the back that connects to the base. But a way to do this even more effectively, to make it really look like I have a three-dimensional cone, is I'm going to do the same thing I did with my cube up here. I'm going to start with that triangular top part of my cone, the main body of my cone. And I'm going to complete that round base. But instead of drawing lines that represent the other side of my cone, I'm going to create a light source. I think I'll put my light source right there again. You can move it around if you want. It's up to you. But now I think about, where is the lightest side of my cone and where is the darkest side of my cone? Well, I think I'll use a very light value on this side since it's closest to the light source, and it will gradually, since this is a cone, it's a curved shape, which means that instead of these hard, solid values, I'm going to create a gradient effect on my cone to make it look like a solid, curved shape. So I've got my lightest value over here by the light source, and then as I go around, it's going to get a little bit darker and darker until we reach the darkest side of my cone. So take a second, decide where your light source on your cone is. It's okay if you shade different parts at different times. That can be a lot easier. So I'm going to shade the darkest part of my cone here and then have it get lighter as it gets toward the lightest side of my cone. You just go back and forth, take a look at it. If you see some areas that you think need to be darker, color them in a little bit more. If there's a part of your gradient that needs to be a little bit smoother. For example, maybe there's a harsh line between the dark and the light. Just smooth it out just a little bit. So it looks like you have light gradually changing to dark. That's going to give you the effect as if you're seeing an actual three-dimensional curved shape. Something like that. I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit so I can get the idea of that form of that cone. You see how by my light source we have the lightest value, and farthest away from my light source we have the darkest value, and that begins to look like a curved cone. So the last one I'm going to do is going to be the most complex. It is very hard to draw a sphere with just lines, because when you look at a sphere, you don't have different edges and different angles, you just have the one circle outline there. And you can do this a little bit like I did with the cone, with the cube, where you just draw some lines on it. For example, if I have a line on the front of my sphere right here, and then I'll draw an equal line, very light, as if it's on the back of the sphere. You can do this with another curved line going the opposite, perpendicular way, and a light one just like it on the other side. So that starts to look like a sphere. That gives you the illusion of 3 dimensions just with those lines. But the other way that you can do this is with value. If I draw my circle outline here, I think I'll put my light source in just about the same place, just so I can get some good practice. Get my little lamp there. Now, I know the lightest side of my sphere is going to be here, since it's closest to the light source. The darkest side is going to be over here. And in between, we're going to have some kind of a gradient from light to dark. But since this shape is curved, I'm going to want, it's curved all sorts of ways rather than just one way like this cone here. The whole surface is all curved. So I'm going to want my gradient to also be all curved. So we're going to be coloring this in with a bit of a circular coloring motion, and we can go back and do little details, but we want the surface of our sphere to appear curved. The other thing that we can do with our sphere to make it look a little bit shiny is we are going to leave just a little sliver of the farthest side. We're going to leave that light because that is going to seem like it is reflecting whatever our sphere is on top of. So we're going to try these value tricks to give us a really three-dimensional looking sphere. First, I'm going to add my lightest value right here, the side that's closest to my light source that is shining on my sphere. I'm going to make that nice and light. Very, 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 very light. And then everything around it is going to be slightly darker. I'm going to start making these circular motions, and then maybe they'll turn into like C-shaped motions or different things. It doesn't have to be perfect. What we're really working on is that gradient from light to dark. And like I said, I think I said in a previous video, you always want to go lighter because it's easier to go darker than it is to take dark coloring off the page. It can be easy if you're using a pencil and you have an eraser. It can be harder if you're using something like a crayon or other types of media. So I'm going to go pretty light and then I'm going to color it in darker. And I'm just doing these curved lines, curved coloring in to really get that illusion of three-dimensional form. And like I said, I'm going to leave this farthest part of my sphere a little bit lighter. Not going to color that in all the way because I'm going for a reflection on this side, as if there's maybe a table here under my sphere, and this is reflecting that table. I'm going to start coloring these things in a little bit darker. So if I imagine where the reflection's going to be, it's probably going to go up to maybe about there. And it's going to be curved because everything on my sphere is curved. And the reflection will probably go to about there. And now I start working back, make this a little bit darker, and make that gradient up towards my lightest part of my sphere. Every once in a while, it's a good idea to take a step back, look at it. Does it look three-dimensional to you? Maybe not yet. I'm going to do a little bit more work on it. Make that gradient a little bit more even, a little bit more smooth. Maybe that reflection looks a little bit too light, so I'm going to color it in a little bit. It's up to you, what you think looks the way you want it to look. And if you have a part of your sphere that's getting darker than another part that is supposed to be darker, you can just color it in a little bit. I don't know if that was very clear wording, but hopefully you know what I meant. And this can take a lot of practice, so don't worry if it's a little bit difficult to get the very first time you're practicing it. That's why we do art a lot. That's why we get a lot of practice in, so that we can learn how to do the things that we want to do in our artwork. Does that look three-dimensional? Oh, it's getting closer. It's getting closer. The other thing we can do that we can practice a little bit is creating shadows. coming off of our three-dimensional objects. And that will help us really feel like there is a light source shining on them, and it is creating a shadow. So there I have my sphere. That is looking a little bit more three-dimensional. I'll color in that reflection just a little bit more. There we go. So with our empty space, if you have some empty space on your piece of paper, let's pick one of our shapes. You can pick a different shape if you want, but it helps to pick a shape that you've already practiced or explored a little bit. And we are going to practice creating a shadow to really bring home that illusion of 3 dimensions. I think I'm going to pick my cone today. I like the cone. Pick any shape you want, although I suggest sticking to one of the 3 that you've already explored. I'm going to do a nice big cone. I think I'll put it right about here. Big tall cone. Give it a nice round base. There we go. And if you want, you can do what I'm going to do, which is to create a horizon line in the back. Maybe your cone is sitting on a table. I don't know if you're doing a cone. Maybe your shape is sitting on a table, or maybe it's sitting out in the middle of the desert, or maybe it's sitting on a raft in the ocean. But it helps to have a horizon line so you can remember that your shape is somewhere. It's not just floating in space, but it is sitting on something. I'm going to create my light source right here. I'm going to make a little sun this time. You can have any light source you want. It is your paper, your exercise. And so I'm going to remember that my sun is shining on my cone from that angle. So if we imagine our light source is here, we want our shadow to be on the other side of our shape. So first we have to imagine where the edges of our shape are. Since we can't really touch our shape, we can't really see or feel the other side of it, we have to draw in a way that seems like it is connecting to that other side. So first I'm going to connect my shadow to what I can see of my shape. I know that right around here is where my shadow is going to come up. If I imagine it, the most of the shadow falling this way, maybe it would be helpful to start with where the point of the shadow falls. If this is my light source, I have the point of my shape. Point of my shape here. I'm going to imagine that the point of my shadow is going to be probably right around here. That's going to be the very top. So if you're drawing a cube or a sphere, just imagine where is the top of that shape? Where's the top of the shadow going to fall? That's the top of my cube, or in this case my cone. I know that that is going to connect to the bottom, the foundation of my cone. And I'm imagining that this cone is on the ground. So the shadow is going to be connected to the bottom. So I'm just going to draw that right there. That's one side of my shadow. And then I know that the other side is going to connect to somewhere along here. I think it's probably going to be right about here. That edge. And that's going to connect right there to that edge of my shadow. And when I connect that, all of a sudden, this already, without any other lines, without any other value shading, just by giving it that shadow, it already looks like a three-dimensional object to me. And if I color this in, color in my shadow just like that with a nice medium mid-tone value. Give it that shadowy feel. Just gonna clean up the edges a little bit. Now that looks like a three-dimensional cone, just because I gave it a shadow. And if you like, you can add some value shading on your bigger shape. You can add some lines on your shape to make it look even more three-dimensional. There are all sorts of ways you can play with form in your artwork to give that three-dimensional feeling to what you're drawing. And these are just a few different things you can explore in your artwork and that we can explore as we go forward with different explorations of form. I hope this has helped you see how you can use form in your artwork. And as always, keep creating and keep sharing. See you next time.